Imagine you're asleep in your own home, doors locked, lights off, everything exactly as you left it. But then, morning comes, and something is different. A flower on your kitchen table, one you didn't buy, one that wasn't there the night before. Or maybe it's a note, handwritten, just 2 words, sitting on your pillow. You live alone. Tonight, we're going to follow the men who did things like this. Men who broke into lives, not just homes, and left behind something far more terrifying than an empty safe or a missing TV. They left behind fear, permanent, bone-deep fear. The kind that never really goes away. And the darkest part? Some of them thought what they were doing was harmless. Welcome back to Midnight Case Files, the channel where we go deep into the stories that keep you up at night. The ones that remind you that the most terrifying monsters don't live under your bed. They live in quiet neighborhoods. They drive ordinary cars, and sometimes they have jobs protecting the very people they're stealing from. If you're new here, you've arrived on a particularly dark night. Make sure you're somewhere comfortable, and maybe lock your doors. Tonight's video covers 4 separate accounts, all connected by one thread. Men who crossed lines they could never uncross, and who discovered too late that consequences have a very long memory. Let's begin. In the early 2000s, somewhere in rural America, a man developed a routine. Not the kind most people have. Not coffee in the morning, not the commute, not the same table at the same diner every Sunday. No. His routine was this: drive into a small, quiet town, find a house on the edge of it, elderly couple, minimal foot traffic, trees behind the property, always trees, always an exit. He did this for 6 months, town to town, state to state, and in that time, he perfected what he called his system. He would approach the door, usually late at night, always dressed clean, and he would knock. When the door opened, he would perform. Broken down car, pregnant wife, just needs to use the phone, just needs a few minutes. I'm so sorry to bother you at this hour. And people let him in, because people, especially older people in small towns, still believed in the goodness of strangers. He would take his time inside. He wasn't violent. He told himself that over and over, as if the repetition made it true. He wasn't violent. He didn't hurt them. He just took things. Cash, jewelry, whatever was easy to carry and easier to sell. He had one rule he held on to like a lifeline. He never took sentimental items. No photo albums, no wedding rings, no heirlooms. As if that line, that single arbitrary line, made him something other than what he was. The night everything changed began like all the others. He'd been driving for hours. He spotted the house just past midnight, a modest place set back from a near-empty road. One dim light in the front window, a car in the driveway, old model, rust creeping up the fenders, and behind the property, just as he preferred, a wall of dark trees. He pulled off the road, observed, waited. 20 minutes. No movement. No dogs barking. No second vehicle. He walked to the front door and knocked. An old woman answered.
small, frail-looking. She peered up at him through the gap, and he gave her the story. The broken car, the wife, the phone. He even managed to sound genuinely distressed, which, after 6 months of practice, wasn't difficult. She opened the door wider, invited him in. And that's when he smelled it. It hit him the moment he crossed the threshold. Something rotten. Not garbage rotten. Not food rotten. Something deeper than that. Something animal. Like sweat and something else. Something he couldn't name, but that his body immediately recognized as wrong. He almost stepped back out. Almost. But the old woman was already moving toward the kitchen, talking about the phone, offering him a glass of water, acting as if this were the most natural thing in the world. He told himself it was nothing. Old house, old smells. He was wrong. Because that's when the hallway door opened, and Hank walked in. There was no other word for him but large. Hank filled the doorframe. 6'3", maybe more. A beard that had gone untrimmed for what looked like months. Heavy work boots. And in his right hand, held loosely but with complete confidence, a hunting rifle. He didn't raise it. He didn't need to. He just looked at the man standing in his mother's living room. And he didn't say a word. The old woman turned, smiled, and said, "Hank, this young man's car broke down. He needs to use the phone." Hank's eyes didn't move. The air in that room, already thick with that smell, seemed to get heavier. And somewhere in the back of the house, a floorboard creaked. One slow, deliberate creak, like someone shifting their weight. Waiting. There was someone else in the house.
He made an excuse. "Car's probably fine now. Sorry to bother you. Thank you so much." He turned toward the door, and when he got to the car, the tires were flat, both of them on the driver's side, slashed clean. He didn't stop to think about how. He ran. Into the trees, through the dark, branches cutting his arms and face, the ground uneven, roots catching his feet. He could hear them behind him, not fast, not panicked, just steady, patient, like they'd done this before. He heard the old woman's voice call out into the dark, not frightened, not desperate, almost pleased. He ran until his lungs gave out, then he ran some more. And when he finally broke through the tree line on the far side onto a dirt road, he didn't stop. He made it into town, hammered on a stranger's door until they opened it and called him a cab. He never went back for the car. He told himself it was nothing, that it was just a strange night, that maybe Hank was just protective, maybe the smell was just the house, maybe the sound in the back room was just an old building settling. But he stopped, completely. That night was the last time he ever ran his system. Not because of guilt, not at first. Because for the first time in 6 months, he had been the frightened one. He had been the one running. And something in that equation told him that whatever currency fate runs on, his account had just come very, very close to empty.
A few years later, a different man, different state, different life, or so he told himself, started a job as an overnight security guard at a large strip mall. It was exactly as dull as it sounds. 8 hours of walking the same loop, checking the same locks, watching the same empty corridors on a bank of grainy monitors. The stores closed at 9.
By 10, the place was a ghost town. Most people would have found it peaceful. He found it full of possibility. It started with curiosity, the way bad things often do. He noticed on his third week that camera 4 had a blind spot, a dead zone right behind the sneaker display in the sporting goods store, about 6 feet wide, enough room for a person to stand completely undetected. He noted it, mentally filed it away, told himself it was just good professional awareness. Then he found the back rooms. Every store in the mall was connected, a labyrinth of back corridors leading from the stock rooms to the security office. These passages existed for deliveries, for emergencies. They were accessible to him, entirely accessible. He told himself later that it had been inevitable, that once he knew the layout, really knew it, it was only a matter of time. The first thing he took was a pair of headphones, still in the box. He walked through the back corridor at 2 a.m., slipped behind the camera's blind spot, and was back at his desk in under 4 minutes. He watched the footage afterward, watched himself not appear, and he felt something he hadn't felt in a long time: control. Weeks passed. The thefts got larger, more systematic. He mapped every blind spot in the building. He learned which stockrooms had inventory logs checked weekly versus monthly. He learned which managers were thorough and which ones were not. He had a system, his own version of it. And then on a Tuesday night in November, while sitting at his monitor desk eating a sandwich at 1:30 a.m., he heard laughter, high-pitched, brief, coming from somewhere inside the mall. He set the sandwich down. He checked the cameras, every single one. The corridors were empty, the stores were dark, the exits were locked. He'd checked them himself an hour before. He told himself it was the building, old ventilation systems, sound traveling strangely through empty spaces. He'd heard of that. He went back to his sandwich. Then someone said his name. Not loudly, not close. It was just there, his name, spoken somewhere in the direction of the sneaker aisle, clear enough that there was no question he'd heard it, no question it was his name. He stood up so fast, his chair rolled back and hit the wall. He grabbed his flashlight and walked the floor, every aisle, every corner. He checked the blind spots, all of them, and he found nothing, no one. The cameras showed nothing too, which was the part that should have been reassuring, which was the part that wasn't. Because on camera 7, the one nearest the sporting goods store, at 1:47 a.m., there was a shadow. Not a person, not a clear shape, just a darkening at the edge of the frame that lasted 4 seconds and then was gone. He watched it back 17 times, and on the 18th viewing, he noticed something else. In the reflection of the store window behind the shadow, barely visible, barely there, was his own face, staring at the camera from a part of the corridor he had no memory of being in. He quit the next morning, handed in his badge, and walked out before his supervisor arrived. He left a voicemail that said he had a family emergency. He never collected his last paycheck. The inventory discrepancies were discovered 3 weeks later. His supervisor put together what had happened quickly enough. There was never a formal investigation. The amounts were too small, the paper trail too thin. But the supervisor knew, and in that small, professionally damaging way that follows people through careers and reference calls and LinkedIn connections, the story followed him. He told people later that he'd quit because the job gave him nightmares. That part, at least, was true.
This story begins with a class project. A young man, socially withdrawn, largely invisible in the way that some people manage to be even in crowded spaces, was paired with a girl named Emily for an assignment. They worked together for 2 weeks. They sat across from each other in the library. They texted about the project. She laughed at one of his jokes. For him, that was enough. More than enough. It started small, the way these things do. He looked her up on social media. Normal enough. He checked her profile daily. Still, perhaps, within some range of normal. Then he found her address. She'd tagged her neighborhood in a post, just the general area. He used that as a starting point, cross-referenced some other details she'd mentioned,
And within a week, he had narrowed it down to 2 houses on one street. He drove past both of them. That was the line. That was the moment when something shifted from uncomfortable to dangerous. Though he would not have called it that. He called it curiosity. He called it caring about her. He began parking down the street. Not every night, just some nights, watching the lights in her windows, noting her schedule, learning her patterns. He told himself he would never approach her. He told himself this was harmless. Then Emily said something in class. It wasn't directed at him. She was talking to a friend, loud enough for the row behind to hear, about how she'd noticed a car parked on her street multiple times, how it creeped her out, how she'd started making sure her blinds were completely closed at night. He stopped breathing for a full 3 seconds. After class, he drove straight home and didn't leave his apartment for 4 days. He stopped going to the class, stopped answering messages, began to understand in a slow and nauseating way what he had actually been doing. Not caring, not curiosity, something with a colder name. The doorbell rang at 11 p.m. on a Thursday. He lived alone. No one came by unannounced. Not ever. He looked through the peephole and saw no one. He opened the door a crack, chain still on, and looked out into the hallway. Empty. On the doormat was a single piece of paper, folded once. He unfolded it. It said, "I know it's you." He closed and bolted the door, called his grandparents, was in their house by midnight, bags barely packed, no explanation given beyond "I need to stay for a while." He never returned to that apartment. He withdrew from the class, from the university. He moved cities. He spent months looking over his shoulder in grocery stores and parking lots, in the specific, exhausting way that only people who have something to be ashamed of tend to do. He had spent weeks frightening someone, and whoever had left that note had spent one piece of paper terrifying him completely. The symmetry of it was not lost on him.
Years passed. The man from Story 1, the one who had run through the woods from Hank and the smell and the creak in the back room, had stabilized. On the surface, he had a job, a routine, a life that looked, from the outside, entirely unremarkable. But the compulsion had not left. It had just changed shape. He no longer wanted to take things from homes. He wanted to enter them, to be inside spaces where he didn't belong, to touch objects that weren't his, to stand in someone else's kitchen at midnight and feel the specific electric thrill of absolute invisibility. And then he started leaving things behind. A flower on a table, a pebble on a windowsill, a folded note left on a pillow. Blank, just the folding itself as the message. He told himself it was harmless. He wasn't stealing, he wasn't hurting anyone. He was, and this was the word he actually used in his own mind, gifting, leaving small surprises for people to find. He did not allow himself to think about what it would feel like to wake up and find a stranger's flower on your kitchen table. He did not allow himself to consider the hours of fear that followed such a discovery, the checking of locks and windows, the nights of not sleeping, the creeping sense that your home, the one place that is supposed to be yours, is no longer entirely safe. He didn't think about any of that. He thought about the thrill. He doesn't know, or at least claims not to know, exactly when the objects began to get darker. But there came a night when, he left a dead bird on the kitchen counter. Small, a sparrow. He'd found it by the roadside on his way over. He told himself it was poetic, a symbol, something about mortality and the fragility of safety. He was, by this point, not well. 3 days later, he returned to the same house, something he had never done before. He had rules. He always had rules.
But the rules had been changing, loosening, one by one, like old stitches. And on the kitchen counter, where the bird had been, was a note. Next to the note was a flower, fresh cut. And next to the flower was another dead bird. He picked up the note. It read, "We know it was you." He put the note down. He put it down very carefully, the way you handle something you're afraid might detonate. He left the house. He walked to his car. He drove home at exactly the speed limit, signaling at every turn, obeying every traffic law with the rigid, terrified compliance of someone who suddenly feels extremely visible. He did not sleep that night, or the next. He began to notice things. A car he didn't recognize parked across from his building 2 days in a row. A neighbor who seemed to make eye contact a beat too long. A silence on the other end of a phone call that lasted just slightly past the point of normal. He had spent years making other people feel this way. The universe, apparently, had taken note. He packed a bag within the week, found a sublet in another city, told no one where he was going. He has not broken into a home since, but he checks his own locks twice before bed, every night, without fail.
4 stories, 4 men, 4 different ways of convincing themselves that what they were doing was controlled, contained, that they had drawn lines and were staying behind them. But lines have a way of moving when you're the one drawing them. The burglar told himself he wasn't violent until he was the one running for his life through the dark. The security guard told himself the thefts were too small to matter until something in that empty building knew his name. The stalker told himself he was just watching until someone watched back. And the reverse thief told himself he was leaving gifts until someone left something back. None of these men ended up in prison, not for these specific acts. And maybe that's the part that should disturb you most. The idea that consequences don't always arrive with handcuffs. Sometimes they arrive quietly, in the form of a flower, a note, a dead bird on a counter. Sometimes the reckoning finds you in your own home, at night, when you think you're safe. This has been Midnight Case Files. If this video kept you up tonight, you know what to do. Subscribe, leave a comment below telling me which story unsettled you most, and stay close, because the next case is already waiting. Lock your doors. Good night.